Thank you. My God, it is wonderful to follow David Rovics, and we did this last night in another town, and he plays completely different songs, and you learn completely different half-dozen lessons of what people have done around the world in different places, in different times, to change things for the better. Of course, I want him to, the only song he played last night that he played tonight was the Better Anarchist song, which I always want him to end on, because that's my favorite song, but he won't because he's such a good anarchist, I think. Certainly, certainly better than me. But I think of Leah as one of the best activists we have in the country, and if that was the only thing that came out of Camp Democracy, that was well worth the efforts. My goodness. I also think of Veterans for Peace as about the best group that we have, the most principled, the most consistent, the most courageously willing to take risks and make sacrifices without self-censorship, without compromise. And I don't know if it's because of the leadership of people like Leah, or it's because these are people who have seen the horrors that they're trying to end, or it's because of some of the good things that you can actually find in wars, the solidarity and the commitment and the sacrifice. But those are the things you also find in the peace movement. When we do it right, it is so much more enjoyable to be active for peace and justice in a movement with commitment and sacrifice than to sit at home and grumble about it. I gave a talk recently in a town in California, and then afterwards, the leading activists, the best people, said, yeah, that's all well and good, but we can't do anything with our congressman because he's a Republican. And I gave a talk the next night in a town not too far away, where they told me at the end, we can't really do any of that stuff you suggested because our representative is a Democrat. And he votes for the wars and the bailouts and so forth. But if we opposed him on anything, then, we would be helping a Republican replace him. And so I'm trying to figure out where is the district where they can say anything. Well, I recently spoke in Massachusetts, where their representative goes by the name of Delahunt, and they had taken to calling him Della Won't, and it was across the board. What's the point? He won't. We call him Della Won't. Well, last week they went into his office and sat there and wouldn't leave. Next week he is sitting down and meeting with them, which he would not do before, and he knows what he's sitting down and meeting with them about. Their demand that he not vote another dime for these wars. So, sitting down and refusing to leave is not that much harder than breaking a law by sitting down and saying, burn it down. You're just sitting in a different chair. And most of the times I've been in jail, have been among the most enjoyable experiences of my life, and most of the times the people sitting in the police van with me on the way to the jail have Vets for Peace shirts on. That these are the people that are there doing it. The town I was in yesterday, and David was in, is called Newport, over on the coast, and they have a parade on what has been disgustingly transformed out of May Day into Patriots Day on May 1st. They have a militaristic parade, and the Code Pink group insists on having an entry in the parade with all of the colorful props and persuasive techniques and approaches, and the organizers aren't very happy, and they try to keep them out, and they come back the next year and have a bigger show in the parade. And then turmoil and appeals to city council and so forth, and they have another year, and Veterans for Peace come with a bus, and next year they are committed to having overwhelmingly the biggest entry in the parade, dwarfing the rest of the parade. So it is going to have become the anti-war parade. they are also now talking about going to their Congress member's office and sitting there, who happens to be a Democrat, and sitting there and doing the same thing the next day and the next day, 2 or 3 people every day, every day, every day. I think it's a wonderful technique. I've seen people do it. You have a rally, a safe rally for everyone outside the office. You present awards to the heroes of the previous day, and you send the new people in. You know, and it's, you know, there are medical studies I can point you to that will show you that this kind of activism is good for your health. It is the solidarity of it that is so much better for your health than sitting home. So it's not just my recommendation, it's your doctor's recommendation. And yes, indeed. Doctor Who. And it's not just, and this is the time when we need to step it up. We need to drop any idea that among our highest values is politeness. These people are committing murder on a big scale. And this is the time to push it forward, not because we're about to win and everything's going in the right direction, but because everything is exactly as bad as you think, and worse and worse. But that's why we have to do it. The book that I've written is in large part a guide to action, but it is also an analysis of where our government is now and our relationship to it and where we need to be. And it's a huge gap. But most of the book is what do we have to do to get there. One thing we don't need to do is persuade most of our fellow Americans. Because when it comes to opinions and understanding, we are so much better informed and so much wiser and so much more progressive on the issues than our televisions will tell us. I want to grab my book just a second. I just want to give you a sample of, you know, there's so many issues where we think we're this little left-wing fringe group because our televisions tell us that. And we would feel more powerful if we understood that we were a majority. Right? So 67% want public works projects to create jobs. 73% want corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes. 76% support tax cuts for low and middle income people. 80% want to raise the minimum wage. 70% want habeas corpus rights for prisoners in Guantanamo and everywhere. 58%, 58% think you should have a court warrant before you listen to our phone calls. And so there's pages and pages of this and citations, and it's worth knowing. But we do need to persuade a heck of a lot of people to take action on their opinions and to do it in effective ways. There we are, lagging badly behind. There's also a survey I look at in the book where they sat people down and showed them the federal budget and what money went where. And a huge majority wanted to take at least 30% out of the military and put it into useful things, right? And even though the activism lags behind the understanding, we are also far more active than our televisions or newspapers would let us believe. The media will not tell us about the activism. And when something is achieved, it's presented in the news without the pressure that made it happen. That part of the story is left out. So we have to tell it to each other. We also are far more successful than we know. I mean, there are thousands of people taking risks in places like Gaza right now and around the country and going to jail and sacrificing their family lives and spending their pensions and their savings for retirement, for peace and justice. But it's not just that. We're also winning in places and we don't know it and we don't talk about it. There's a long list in my book of state and local victories that people are winning all over the country that are never in the national news. I was in Seattle 3 days ago where a company wanted to turn an island in Puget Sound into a mine for gravel with all kinds of environmental destruction. And they took families out in colorful kayaks and blockaded and stopped the thing, ended the thing. You know, these are kinds of victories that happen all the time, and nobody knows it even if they're 5 miles away. In Oregon, if measures 66 and 67 pass, you will have done something useful and significant that the other 49 states won't know anything about unless you tell them. And if you can get, these are the measures for a little bit of progressive taxation, and if you get a lot of people involved and feel like they're a part of that right before those pass and win, then they have that victory under their belts, and they want to do something more. So I encourage you to get involved in any local or state campaign like that you think you can win, because then people are ready to take on something bigger where they don't think they have a chance at winning. You've got fusion voting now in Oregon, which may be a wonderful tool. There's a shopping mall outside of Philadelphia where I also was recently, where the Army has put in something called the Army Experience Center. To teach 13-year-olds that it's fun to kill foreigners with real weapons but video game screens, with Army recruiters helpfully hanging around. And there has been such effective and endless protest, civil resistance, pickets, people going to jail, bad media coverage, that it's not working. It's not recruiting people the way that they thought it would. And so the Army started talking to the news about, you know, we might not put this in every shopping mall across the country, but we might actually not keep this one open because here's the reason: the economy is so awful that recruitment is up. Well, you know, the economy is awful, recruitment is up, and they're still spending millions and millions on all kinds of other recruitment techniques, but not this one. And then the very activists who've possibly won a victory, they need to keep it up until it does get shut down, but who have at least stopped them from putting it in other cities, repeat the Army's line. Oh, but they might shut it down because of the economy. You know, so we have to see through the lies and claim the victories. When, you know, and just the victory of counter-recruitment that has kept recruitment down. You know, the wars are being fought exactly to the extent that there are troops and mercenaries to fight them. To the same extent that President McCain would be fighting them, we are fighting them. It's a question of how much we are resisting the recruitment, and we are doing an incredible job in many places, getting the tests out of the schools, getting the recruiters out of the schools. There was an announcement by the president not too long ago that we won't put a so-called missile defense base in the Czech Republic, right? Well, yeah, it's good, and then on the other hand, of course, they'll do it with shorter range missiles on ships, or they'll put 2 bases in some other country. It's not that they're going to shut down the missile defense nonsense, but the story in the news was this is to kiss up to Russia. No mention of the fact that a handful of people in the Czech Republic organized their whole nation and 100 mayors and went and overthrew the government and made it impossible had the nation say, no, you can't put the base here. That part's not in the story. You know, the people's movement's victories in South America are not in the stories about the dictators in whichever nations have the oil. The fact that we made the war in Iraq illegal by making the United Nations say no to it is forgotten and buried in the fact that they went ahead with the war. But that we made it illegal is why we may someday be able to hold people accountable for it. And because we exposed the lies so effectively, that Americans are more than ever before understanding of war lies, that we've prevented thus far an attack on Iran. And there's not going to be a day when they say, oh, here's the day when you prevented the attack on Iran, or here's the day when you kept Social Security in existence a little longer. You know, we have to recognize the victories and claim them every day. And one of my favorites that sort of got lost was when we drove Alberto Gonzales out of town. And, you know, yeah, it was a good one. And they replaced him with someone exactly as bad. Yes, they did. But it was a very interesting technique that we used, that we should learn from and repeat, that drove him out of town. And it wasn't just talking bad about him and educating each other about him, and it wasn't just having him come in to committees on both sides of the Hill and say, "I do not recall, sir. I do not recall, sir." What do you think it was that, in my opinion anyway, forced him out of town? What other pressure was there?
People. Laughter.
Well, no, it wasn't laughter, although there was lots of it. These people have no shame. I mean, he knew he was going to embarrass himself. He willingly went on camera and embarrassed the heck out of himself. But the United States Congress threatened, and with the tool that I have in mind, 90% of the time it's used, it doesn't have to actually be employed, it just has to be threatened. The United States Congress threatened to use something that has been used many times in U.S. history that we don't know about, that is in the definition of the House of Representatives in the Constitution, and discussed 6 times in the Constitution, unlike anything else. Impeachment. A congressman from Washington State put in a 1-sentence bill that said the House Judiciary Committee shall consider whether Alberto Gonzales should be impeached. And you had 30 people immediately sign on. Then it was summer 2007. You had the people telling their Congress members, you better sign on to that bill. And you had dozens of them committing to sign on when the Congress got back. But by that time, Alberto had hit the road. Not because he was embarrassed, not because he found shame or a conscience, but because, like everything else he did, every single time he sneezed or tied his shoes, the president told him. Because if you're committing crimes at the behest of the president, and you're dragged in for an impeachment hearing, and the impeachment hearing says, we want the torture photos, we want the torture videos, we want the reports, we want the evidence, we want you to squeal on you, to squeal on you. What happens if anybody says, no, you can't have that? Then the President of the United States is impeached for refusal to comply with an impeachment hearing, which is exactly what Richard Nixon was being impeached for when he left town. So it's a useful tool that I want to come back to. I want to say a word in general about where our activism should go, because, you know, Emma Goldman not only said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution, and would have supported the work of Mr. Rovics, but she also said if voting changed anything, they would make it illegal. And in this country, unlike civilized nations around the world, you're automatically registered for Social Security, you're automatically registered to go kill and die, but you're not automatically registered to vote, because that would be harder for some reason. And so instead, you have to go out and work to register people to vote, which Acorn, which I used to work for, was far too successful at. But as a result, we think of activism as coming before elections. And our televisions tell us over and over and over again that our role is voting in elections. And then when the election is over, we say, God, I'm tired, let's take a break. Glad we did that, now they'll run the country for us. Which is exactly wrong. Activism, of course, begins the day after the election. Not that we could do without elections, but most of what we do begins the minute it's over. And it has to begin the minute it's over in a far more independent way than how we're doing it. Most of the activist groups you hear from, most of the labor unions, most of the progressive movement takes a good deal of its direction from the White House, from the congressional leaders, from the Progressive Caucus, and goes out to their members and says, here's what you're going to lobby for. getting direction for what to lobby for from the very people we're supposedly lobbying, which means that you're a prop. If you belong to a labor union and 85% of you want single payer, and your president tells you we're going to have a rally and you're forbidden to say single payer, you must say public option or you cannot be here, then you're a prop. You're not a citizen. They're telling you what to do. You're not telling them what to do. And we have to be active with an understanding that elected officials are not evil instead of good, or good instead of evil. They're not all wrong or all bad, with us or against us, on our team or on the other team. They're elected officials, all of whom do good things and bad things, and have to be rewarded for the good things and punished for the bad things. And punishing them for the bad things tends to build a better relationship with them than kissing up to them does. We have to do it with an understanding of the significance of the House of Representatives as opposed to either the Senate or the President. Lobbying a president is virtually impossible. I don't care who the president is. You know, not only did we expect that for the first time in the history of this galaxy, a candidate would not only keep all his promises, but was actually secretly plotting to do better than his campaign platform. But we pretended for a year that he still was somehow. And yet, when we got up the nerve to say anything, we said it to the president. So the entire population is either, Mr. President, please escalate the war, or Mr. President, please don't escalate the war, ignoring the fact that if we allow presidents to have the power to make such a decision, we're all going to die. It should not be the president's decision, and we have very limited ability to influence a president or a senator. It's very, very hard to influence a senator. A House member, uphill and unfair and corrupted as the system is, and the media and the money and the parties and everything against us, it's easier, and it will continue to be easier no matter how many reforms we make, to influence a member of the House. And the beauty of it is that for most of the most important things, we only need the House. Right? To pass a bill that has to go through two houses, you have to make it bad enough to pass the Senate. Right? It doesn't matter what the House thinks. You have to make the bill suck bad enough that it'll go through the Senate. But for most of the most important things we have to do right now, we don't need to pass bills. When your Congress member introduces a bill to say we don't want to fund an escalation of a war, they're playing games with you. Because if it passes the House, then it has to pass the Senate and the President. But to end a war, the House just has to not vote any more money. So, to end the bailouts, the House just has to not vote for them. To end the health care ripoff, the House just has to not vote for it. To subpoena or impeach anybody, a House committee just has to do it, right? So when you break out of thinking about passing bills to thinking about blocking bills and performing oversight, you only need one branch. So I mentioned ACORN, but I want to stress that the reason an organization gets attacked is because it's become successful. Successful at registering people to vote, but successful through direct action that's frightening people. When Bush was president and he was cutting off money more and more each year for heat, for poor people who are freezing in the winter, right? And he's ready to go to Chicago and give a big speech about saving the economy. Well, we got a bunch of people, elderly, all generations and backgrounds from Chicago, who didn't have heat and were freezing. And we went to the Republican Party of Illinois' offices. And we brought sleeping bags and we moved in. And I was not there, I was ACORN's press person, but the people who were there were answering the phones. Republican Party of Illinois, this is ACORN, we've taken over the Republican Party of Illinois. And, you know, and oh my God, I gotta call the cops, you know. And so the morning that Bush comes to Chicago, the only story in the news is footage of elderly women being hauled into police vans and taken to jail because they don't have heat in their apartments. The money for heat that year went up in Washington. And we did the exact same thing to the Democrats. Otherwise, it's pointless, right? I mean, there's nothing I find more offensive right now than stopping and thinking about the failure to resist the war now because it's a Democrat in the White House, and that means that millions of people pretending to oppose wars for the past 7 years were just opposing someone who was a Republican. You know, imagine if George W. Bush had accepted a peace prize with the world's first ever peace prize acceptance speech glorifying war. Imagine the outrage in this country. I also love coming after David Rovics because it reminds everybody that most of the big victories didn't happen in a week or a month or a year, but over generations. Slavery and suffrage and civil rights and labor. And that means outreach and education and organizing and educating young people, because we're not going to win the things we need to win while anybody in this room is alive. We might win some of them. But if you're doing education and outreach, and Leah's going to have a proposal for some educational activities, you're guaranteed you're doing something good, whether you win something that week or not. And look at how far we've turned the country against wars and war lies. I want to open this up to questions, but I want to come back to Mr. Gonzalez for one moment and ask how many people have heard about a guy named Jay Bybee. Beautiful, beautiful. I've done 4 events here in the Northwest, and 2 of them everybody knew who Jay Bybee was, and 2 of them nobody knew. And one of the ones where nobody knew was a block away in Seattle from a courthouse where he sometimes sits. And for those of you who don't know, Jay Bybee ran the office in the Justice Department that wrote the secret memos that were treated as laws and still are, that legalized torture and legalized aggressive war at the whim of a president, any future president, unless this precedent is undone. And he did this because he wanted to be a judge. And they made him a judge, and he's a lifetime judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Oregon and Washington and California. And he's sometimes sitting there in a courthouse in Portland, and they're protesting. And if you want to join them, you should, and we'll get you in touch with them. But what if there were a number of people in this congressional district who were so outraged that someone who had put the supreme crime of mass murder down in black and white and signed it was sitting there as a judge in this state, and went to their congressman and said, why in the hell can't you introduce a 1-sentence bill like they did to Alberto Gonzalez and become a hero? You know, there's a gentleman named Alan Grayson in Florida who brought in $500,000 for saying things and calling Cheney a vampire. Can you imagine how much support is going to flood into you? You aren't going to need Rom or Nancy if you do this for us. So that's one proposal I have. Another proposal I have is, of course, to demand that they commit publicly to not voting any more money for these wars. And if you go to defundwar.org, you'll see a chart of where every Congress member stands and useful information to take with you. And if you go to peaceoftheaction.org, P-E-A-C-E, peaceoftheaction.org, you'll see how you can join us in March of this year when we try to do what any civilized country would have done years ago, what we would have done before Camp Democracy, and shut Washington, D.C. down with massive nonviolent resistance. Peaceoftheaction.org. And I want to close with 2 quotes that I put at the very front of this book. And some of you may have read the book already, but most of you, I'm sure, have not. And these are from 2 very different people, writing in different languages. The one is translated to English and saying the exact same thing. And the first is from a journalist by the name of I.F. Stone, who says, The only kinds of fights worth fighting are those you are going to lose. Because somebody has got to fight them and lose and lose and lose until someday, somebody who believes as you do wins. In order for somebody to win an important major fight 100 years hence, a lot of other people have got to be willing, for the sheer fun and joy of it, to go right ahead and fight knowing you're going to lose. You mustn't feel like a martyr. You've got to enjoy it. And the other one, originally in French by a gentleman by the name of Albert Camus, concludes a lengthy essay that I recommend reading the whole thing. And it deals with a myth of a guy by the name of Sisyphus who rolls a stone up a hill. And the damn thing rolls back down again. And he says, I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. The universe, henceforth without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Thank you.